Hello, Miss Smith. Sergeant Adam Slater at Coos County Sheriff's Office. Calling you back to let you know I called that number you gave me. A gentleman answered the phone, whom I believe to be Jason. They advised me they didn't want to speak with me. So at this point, I'm putting out probable cause for his arrest. So when we find him, we will arrest him on the charges you alleged against you. So if you have any further questions for me, you can call me back, 541-396-7806. But at this time, we have PC up for Mr. Snellgrove's arrest. So when any law enforcement agency finds him, he will be arrested on our PC. Thank you. Bye-bye.
There is no record, any call for a probable cause arrest of rape suspect Jason Snellgrove ever went out. In June of 2023, Valerie Smith reported a rape naming Snellgrove as her alleged attacker. Her story is detailed on jedry.com. In Coos County, you can get away with rape. Smith underwent a rape test at a local hospital. She turned over her grass-stained clothes to deputies. Smith further provided a detailed timeline and even a log of her GPS travel from her cell phone and much more. To date, Snellgrove has never been questioned, much less arrested. Slater turned the case into the district attorney. Deputy DA John Blanc closed the case without explanation in October 2023. Full interview with Smith will be available soon. Hey there. My name's Mary Jedry, and I have as my guest today Valerie Smith. Valerie is a very brave woman. She alleges, we have to use that word, unfortunately, that she was raped, and what we've discovered is that apparently you can get away with rape in Coos County, and nothing really happens. So what we're identifying, and it's Valerie certainly isn't the first case where this is happening. What we're identifying is the impact of gender bias on victims, and in particular gender bias with respect to sexual assault and domestic violence, and how it can deny people justice, and it can enable criminals to remain on the streets. So I want to read just a few snippets from the Justice Department report on gender bias in policing. And one of the things it says, one critical part of improving law enforcement agencies' response to allegations of sexual assault and domestic violence is identifying and preventing gender bias in policing practices. Gender bias in policing practices is a form of discrimination that may result in law enforcement agencies providing less protection to certain victims on the basis of gender, failing to respond to crimes that disproportionately harm people of a particular gender, or offering reduced or less robust services due to a reliance on gender stereotypes. Gender bias, whether explicit or implicit, conscious or unconscious, may include police officers misclassifying or underreporting sexual assault or domestic violence cases, or inappropriately concluding that sexual assault cases are unfounded. Does that sound familiar? Failing to test sexual assault kits, interrogating rather than interviewing victims and witnesses, treating domestic violence as a family matter rather than a crime, failing to enforce protection orders, or failing to treat same-sex domestic violence as a crime. In the sexual assault and domestic violence context, if gender bias influences the initial response to or investigation of the alleged crime, it may comprise law enforcement's ability to ascertain the facts, determine whether the incident is a crime, and develop a case that supports effective prosecution and holds the perpetrator accountable. Where have we heard that? we've experienced that very recently. So, um, uh, there's actually some examples that they give in here, which I did not highlight, so I have to look for them for a second. Oh, here's some statistics which I think are worth repeating. 90% of all cases of rape involve female victims. Nearly 1 in 5 women in the United States, which is 18.3%, have been raped. About 1 in 4 women, 24.3%, and 1 in 7 men, 13.8%, in the United States have experienced severe physical violence at the hands of an intimate partner. 44% of lesbian women and 61% of bisexual women have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner. And 26% of gay men and 37% of bisexual men have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner. And let's see if I can find those examples that they, because this is definitely what, God knows what page it's on. There's so many footnotes in this report. Okay, example. A young woman enters a police station and reports that 2 weeks earlier she was raped at a house party by a colleague from work. The woman reports that she had been drinking that evening. The police officer on duty asks how often the woman drinks excessively at house parties and asks her what she was wearing that night. The officer then tells her that she should really watch how much she consumes when she goes out at night, especially if she is getting dressed up. That's a U.S. Department of Justice example. A woman who has been known to engage in prostitution flags down a police officer who frequently patrols her neighborhood. She reports to the officer that she was just raped. The police officer on duty writes down her statement, but when he returns to the police station, he immediately classifies the complaint as unfounded and takes no further action because of the woman's sexual and criminal history. So, those are just, they have other examples, but those are a couple of them. So, what we've experienced, by we, I mean you and me, by virtue of writing about it and trying to get in any answers from the police department or the sheriff's office, which has been a complete bust. I feel that this is kind of I think it's endemic in the area. I think that there is, I've overheard local elected officials not appended to the sheriff's office make comments about, well, women sometimes just make complaints or something, you know. And I've heard people defend, well, I don't want to get political here by any stretch, but I've heard people defend Donald Trump and blame E. Jean Carroll, and because she had the audacity to win a lawsuit, and there's like no sympathy for her and all this sympathy for him. And then you brought this documentary to my attention, which I'm having a horrible time watching because it just is so depressing. Called Victim Suspect, where victims of a rape end up being prosecuted and accused of filing a false report. And luckily, as I haven't made it through that far because I have to keep stopping, but they eventually they both had a better ending to their story over time. But it's one of the problems in this report. I'm not going to look for it because I'll never find it. But one of the points that this report mentions is that women are very unlikely to report rape because they pretty much know already that they're not going to get any real help. In your case, you were amazing. I mean, you documented everything. You GPSed your location and your travel time and your whole deal. And so why don't we talk about that a little bit?
I mean, I first off, I've never been raped before. I didn't want to deal with this whole process. The only reason I did press charges was because I don't want another female to go through what I went through. That's the only reason I did it. And in my wildest dreams, I honestly never expected that me reporting it and the way that authorities handled it, and it was just really sad. And and I thank you for being my voice to keep this out there, because I don't want this to happen to someone else, and I don't want someone to feel that if they go and ask for help in this kind of circumstances, that they're not going to get help. It's wrong.
Well, I'm actually grateful to you. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing. And I'm not going to criticize women who make a decision not to come forward, because who knows what's going on in their life and everything else. But absolutely, when you don't go forward, and the true crime shows on Discovery are full of stories about men who are repeat offenders for that very reason. And some women are able to compartmentalize it and bury it and move on. And some people are so traumatized. And you have been very traumatized. Feel free to talk about that if you want, but I also feel that you've been re-victimized by the system, by people who just don't care.
All over again. Yeah.
For example, in one of your conversations with Deputy Adam Slater, who was not the only person that you spoke to, but apparently the one in charge, he writes in his report that you were very angry and upset with him. And then he at one point, I don't think this was in his report, but I think you told me that when you were talking to him at one point, he said, well, you were drinking and you were flirting. And so there you are. Men just can't keep their whatever in their pants if a woman's drunk and flirting. Now, in your case, you weren't drunk. You claim that well, why don't you just tell your story? I don't want to tell it for you.
I went to his house, and he made me 2 drinks, which were both in red Solo cups, not big,
Yeah.
and they were only filled about that much.
Mm-hmm.
And I only had 2 of those at his house. The next day, I kind of realized that he's making these drinks in a blender, which his back was turned towards me, so I couldn't see what he was doing in the blender, but there was no ice in the drinks. So he obviously was blending something up in my drink, which Sergeant Slater obviously failed to mention in his report.
Yeah. How many days did it? What I know you. Well, let's back up. First of all, the assault was fast. Like 3 or 4 minutes, and he was satisfied. And then the next thing you remember is being in your car on the road already.
Halfway home, yeah.
Halfway home. So, I mean, it doesn't appear that he was interested in developing a longer relationship by any stretch of the imagination. And it would certainly seem that that must have been his intent in inviting you back to play cornhole in the first place. And but I don't want to jump to too many conclusions. But you immediately, once you got home, you started documenting and acting on what had happened.
Yeah, I called 911, and that's when Deputy Starr came out to my house and interviewed me first. Asked me to take off my clothing that I was wearing because I had grass stains on the back of my sweatshirt. Took my clothing for evidence, and then that's when Sergeant Slater came and interviewed me again.
Okay. Can you describe that experience?
First off, I remember the one thing from that interview because I was still a little in shock, so I don't remember all the details. But the one thing that he said to me was when I told him that I got in my car and drove away. He said, "So you were drinking and driving?"
Yeah.
And that's when I gave him a little smack on the shoulder and I said, "Yeah, thanks, Captain Obvious."
Yeah.
Like, what was I going to do? I'm out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. And you've just been raped.
Yeah.
You're supposed to stay at your rapist until you're sober. I mean, he obviously didn't want you to stay there. So he was done. He was,
Well, and the other funny part of the whole thing was, initially I would think that when you call 911 and tell them that you've been raped, yes, you would get interviewed by a deputy, but I would think that deputy would take you to the hospital at that point in time so that you can get the rape exam test done. But they couldn't because their nurse wasn't going to be in until 7 a.m. the next morning.
I see. Whose nurse? The hospital nurse? Or
hospital nurse, yeah.
So that was, okay. And so only one, they only have one nurse qualified for a SANE test?
Yep.
Interesting. So did they tell you to be careful about don't take a shower, don't?
I don't believe they did, but I just know common sense not to do any of that.
Yeah. So the next morning you went to the hospital then? And that took, 2-3 hours?
Actually, I went the first time, and I freaked out because I didn't have health insurance at the time. And I kept asking her, well, who's going to pay for this? I'm not going to pay for this.
Yeah.
So I ended up leaving. And, but I did go back the next morning at 6 a.m.
Okay. And then how long did that whole process take? And did you have to pay for it?
The state luckily paid for it.
Oh, good.
I had to apply for it. I had to go through the whole paperwork and wait for their answer, which would have been a $3,000 hospital bill.
Wow. So that's a component I didn't realize that you'd had to go through. So, yeah, not only are you violated, but then you then you have to foot the bill to prove that you were violated. And wow. And so, did you ever get the results of that test?
Nope.
And have they explained why?
When I called the hospital and talked to the nurse, she told me that that is now forensic evidence and they cannot release it to me unless I have a subpoena.
Okay, well.
Which, it's my records. I should be able to get them, I would think.
I would think, but maybe, I mean, you know, you're basically just getting a copy of a report, so I don't see.
I don't either.
I mean, it's not like you can alter it.
I don't understand the whole logic behind it. I really don't.
Yeah. I don't know either. Maybe we can find that out. That would be kind of interesting. And then your experience wasn't just limited to the sheriff's department. Well, let's stick with the sheriff's department for right now. Deputy Slater. What's your next interaction with him?
So the rape happened on a Sunday, which was Father's Day. I waited to hear something, but I didn't hear anything about it, so I ended up calling, and he informed me that he was off Mondays and Tuesdays. And he said, well, I'll get right on it. Well, first off, he tells me, well, we drove around for 3 hours, and we couldn't find his place. I said, okay, well, did you try calling him? Well, you didn't give me his phone number. It wasn't BS, because I'm sorry, but if you're law enforcement, wouldn't that be like one of the first things you would ask a victim?
Yeah.
Do you have a phone number? Or can he could have looked it up online. It's just, yeah. So anyways, I wasn't happy from the get-go with his response. And then he hung up the phone with me and calls me back and says that he had tried to contact Snellgrove, and that whoever answered the phone made it sound like they weren't him. And then they finally changed their attitude and said, you can contact my lawyer, and hung up on him. So at that point, I was told...
Did he provide the name of a lawyer?
No. But,
okay.
So Slater at that time said, well, we're going to put out a warrant for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the warrant expired after a week or something?
I was told 7 days, yeah. So on the 6th day, I was at an establishment, and he was in the building where I was at. So I went to the ladies' room and called the non-emergency line and said, he is here. He has a warrant for his arrest. And the guy couldn't find it. So I don't even know if there was actually a warrant put out for him. I sat there and waited and waited. Nobody came. So the next day, I talked to Sergeant Slater, and he said, well, unfortunately the warrants run out, and so I'm going to have to send it to the DA. And I said, okay, well, what happened last night? when I called 911 and told them that he was in the building physically and you guys didn't do anything, he just said, well, I wasn't on duty, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So you're the only cop in town?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And when you saw him at this establishment, that was actually in Coos Bay or North Bend.
Coos Bay.
So a cooperating agency could have gone and picked him up
Mm-hmm.
and handled that. But they said they couldn't find the warrant.
Nope. It was a gentleman on the dispatch end. Yeah, he said he couldn't find anything.
Can you have you tried to find a copy of the warrant?
I can't find anything.
So that would be something that'd be worth searching, because there should be a record.
There has to be, I would think.
Well, there's this phase where you can go to the state court's website and you can look up cases, but if it hasn't been assigned a case number yet, which could be the case, then you won't necessarily find anything. But if there's a case number, then you can usually start going backwards and determine if there's been warrants issued or whatever. But that's a public records request. A warrant is a public record, so I think the thing to do is file a public records request with the sheriff's office, and I'll probably charge you $20 or something to get it. But, they're only supposed to charge you per page, so most warrants aren't that long, but unless he's really wordy. But
apparently not.
Apparently not. Man of few words. So, well, let's do that. I can run across the street possibly this week, because I live across the street from the courthouse, and go over there and see if I can find. And I need the dates, would be helpful. Names should be enough, but we'll find out if there was ever any actual warrant issued, or if he just lied to you.
Yeah, so it would have been, so June 18th was the date of the rape, which would have been a Sunday. So 19th, 20th, 21st is when he told me that he'd put a warrant out.
Okay. Okay. So then he tells you it's been turned over to the DA, and it's up to them now, and they'll have to do like a grand jury indictment in order to. Didn't he also tell you, though, that he was going to talk to Snellgrove? Mm-hmm. I guess we should, for the record, the accused is Jason Snellgrove. He's innocent until proven guilty. But that he was gonna arrange to speak with Snellgrove in the presence of his attorney.
That's what I was told. Yeah.
Do you recall the dates on that? You did keep really good records, so you might have written it down somewhere.
I do have it written down, yes.
Okay. You sent me a bunch of that stuff, but I don't have it up in front of me, so.
Yeah.
But maybe if you get a chance, look through it, and then I'll
Do you want me to grab it right now?
No, don't worry about it right now.
Okay.
Okay. But to your knowledge, that never happened.
From there, Well, I did scream and yell at Sergeant Slater on the phone. Told him that what he was telling me was unacceptable, and that I would be going above him, and the person above him, and the person above him, because what they're doing to me is not right. And I felt
Right.
like they literally are just sweeping it under the rug.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so then it goes to the DA. So then I start contacting the DA's office, just trying to get an
And,
update. I'm trying to stay
and
on
and the DA assigned to your case was John Blanc.
it. Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Who's not the most pleasant person to talk to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, describe that.
Well, there was one occasion when I had called after calling multiple days. Yes.
Mhm.
I called and he did pick up the phone and he was very, very short and kind of just very rude. Like, why are you calling? Stop calling. If you're going to keep calling every day, it's not going to help your case. Just very short with me. And no, like, hey, we're looking into it. Nothing. Just completely rude to me.
Or any empathy towards a
Yeah,
victim.
zero.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other than
So
I'm just calling and bugging him.
that's another example of gender bias. And in this instance, he's colored by the police reports that he's seen. And it's possible, Valerie, that he hasn't even read those yet. So, according to Paul Frazier, who is not running for reelection, his department has a backlog of 1,400 cases. And they triage violent crimes over property crimes. And, they've got this huge backlog. And this is one of the reasons that they want this safety levy to be passed so that property owners can help bring in an extra roughly $6 million per year for the next 5 years, so that they can hire 2 more deputy DAs. They've actually, part of their problem is that they have vacancies. There's been a shortage of attorneys, apparently. And then they want to increase how many beds are available at the jail. All this sounds good in theory, but I don't see how that will protect people like yourself from being the victim of gender bias, because local law enforcement agency policies are not addressing these concerns. When most agencies have general rules, general orders. So if they go out on a crash scene, they have to complete and do X, Y, Z, or ABC, or 1, 2, 3, 4, all these steps before they are done with their initial investigation. Same with a domestic violence case, a sexual assault, I would suspect, and I'm guessing here because the sheriff has chosen not to respond to my requests for their general orders, their policies and procedures, that at least one of those things, one of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things, is to interview the suspect. I would hope. Maybe not. Whatever. But what I also think, because we're experiencing this in another case that I'm working on, I hate to use the word case, another story that I'm working on, because it's not really a case for me, it's a story, is that he's already colored the opinion of the prosecutor. He's already colored the opinion of his supervisors. You know, he's presented his view, and they've accepted his view, and he's revealed his view to you in that statement that, well, you were drinking and flirting. In his police report, he doesn't say that you only had 2 drinks. He said you had multiple drinks. And, you know, that in itself can prejudice the reader into thinking, oh, you know, it's, I mean, I hate using this phrase, because, you know, just because somebody gets drunk doesn't forgive them for assaulting somebody in a bar. But for some reason, if a woman gets drunk, it leaves her, it makes it her fault if somebody assaults her. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so, it's gender bias, which sounds like such a rote little phrase, but unfortunately, you know, it's really prevalent. And
Yeah, and that was the sad part when I again called the DA's office, and then was told that the case did get dropped. They closed it. So nobody ever contacted me. Nobody
to tell
ever
you,
asked any questions.
yeah.
It was just kind of a psh, psh, done.
So I didn't know that. I don't think you shared that part. How long ago was that when you?
That would have been the date that the DA closed the case, which I believe would have been October 17th, maybe October 13th, somewhere in that area.
Okay, so quite a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how long it took for them to look at my case and just drop it.
So they drop it based on the evidence that they have, which, as far as we know, doesn't even include an interrogation or anything. So, and now they want to ask us for more money. So, and they call it a safety levy. And, you know, I don't feel safe. I just don't see how.
I don't feel safe.
No, absolutely not. And the other thing that happens is that it forces women or victims to turn to the civil courts for any kind of accountability. And that in itself is complicated because I don't believe that you'll find a local attorney willing to, because they all have to work, even if they're not criminal attorneys, they all have to work with the local,
Right.
officials and.
But at the same time, I shouldn't have to go through all of that. Somebody in the beginning initially should have done their job.
Yes.
And I wouldn't be here right now talking about it. If somebody would have just followed through and not been lazy about it, and I hate to say that because I know they're busy, but at the same time, nobody put any kind of time or effort into any of it.
So in this other story that I'm working on that involves Slater, one of the individuals, person of interest, just left the area. He didn't go that far, but he left the area. And therefore, Deputy Slater was just unable to locate him. And see, he has a hard time locating people when he's not interested in locating them. And so.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can find online, and I'm sure they have more access than we would to any information for anyone.
You would think. Anyway, that's appalling. I didn't realize that they had actually closed the case. I thought it was just still lingering out there, but
no.
that's really.
And after they closed it, obviously I was not happy. You know, and I tried to get a face-to-face meeting with Blanc. Never could get any response. I even went there in person, and of course he was busy. So, you know, they don't want to meet face-to-face.
No.
But he should have. He really should have. Because I laughed when I read that police report. It was so
empty.
So empty. So many details. And I look at it and I'm like, okay, well, I can understand why Blanc would just be like, okay, well, we don't have anything here, so we're just going to shut it.
So, to be fair, these types of cases are really hard to prosecute and win. Nobody's denying that. But they're impossible to prosecute and win if you don't put in any effort whatsoever. And so basically what the system said to you, what Deputy Slater and the Sheriff's Department and Paul Frazier and the District Attorney's Office said to Valerie Smith is, we don't care.
There's no pointing gun, is what I was told.
Yeah. It's just a little too hard. Just deal with it. You were drinking and flirting. Just anyway.
You know, it's been a roller coaster of a ride, to say the least, from the beginning. You know, I have gone to counseling, which has helped a lot. But, you know, there's days where I cry. And then there's days when I'm just angry. And I'm just angry because no one's done anything. And it all just kind of keeps replaying in my head. Like, well, you know, so it's a roller coaster ride for sure, to say the least. It's not easy.
I'm sure it's not easy.
And nor I didn't want to deal with all this. I really didn't think I was going to have to go through all of this, and it's really sad that it's turned into this. But it's also kind of woken me up a little bit as to what other people are going through and how the system is just failing and not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just gender bias. You know, there's lack of resources or just poor training, lack of awareness. I think gender bias plays a huge, it's in your story and this other story. And
we drove around for 3 hours and we couldn't find him.
Yeah.
And when I said, "Did you try to call him?" Like, I mean, that would have been my first thing.
And he says, "Well, you didn't give me his number." Well, did you call me and ask me for his number?
No, and he didn't do that either.
Yeah.
But I know I gave Deputy Starr at least that phone number.
Yeah. They didn't want to find him. And I would be willing to bet that they didn't look for him.
No, because in that first conversation, it was we drove around for 3 hours. Then the next couple conversations, it turned into, well, we drove around for an hour and a half looking for him. So his story changed.
Yeah.
So it makes it kind of hard to believe what he's telling me.
Let's do a public records request. So you think it was the 21st when he said that he was issuing a warrant?
It would have been, yeah, because Sunday would have been the 18th, 1920, 21st. I still have the voicemail on my phone.
Okay. Don't delete that.
I won't. Unfortunately, I don't want it there, but it's there.
Yeah. In fact, you could forward that to me. If you,
I will.
If you will. All right. Well, it's been fun and discouraging. Hopefully enlightening for anybody who's able to sit through this. And I do encourage everybody to watch that documentary on Netflix. I'm having a hard time watching it.
As you should.
Just because I get through a few minutes and I have to stop and I have to walk away because it's so disheartening. So disheartening.
Unfortunately, it's the hard truth of how everything's going.
So it's Victim Suspect.
Yep.
Is the name of the documentary.
Victim/suspect. Yep.
Right. So I would encourage people to go watch that, and we'll be back. We'll follow up and we'll see what's going on. And if we ever hear anything from our illustrious sheriff, we'll be sure to update you about that too. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.